Hello, everyone. So, big surprise today as a new patch has dropped for StarCraft 2. This was totally out of the blue. I don't think anyone was really expecting it, despite murmurs that the Balance Council was still talking and that there might be someone listening to them from Blizzard. And to me, that just felt like not necessarily a lie, but more like, yeah, it probably is happening, but like, what's it really going to amount to? And apparently, it amounts to this, which is also a very big patch. There are a lot of big changes in here, and I like some of them actually. I'm going to go over all of these patch notes, my opinions on them without actually testing anything, obviously. Then I'm going to go and look at Reddit and Team Liquid and see what other people are saying to see if they have some good points. And then that's actually going to be it. Probably just talk about how, disclaimer, things can always change with the patches. They are going to be played on the PTR. Hopefully they will look at the results and they'll tweak stuff that might be overpowered or underpowered. And disclaimer that predictions go wrong all the time. It can seem fine in PTR, and then 4 months down the road, someone really figures out how to abuse things. And that's just StarCraft and game design. So with that said, this is also me coming into this patch from being honestly a little disillusioned with StarCraft. It kind of happened before EWC that the repetitiveness of PvT was really starting to grind. The lack of Zerg players as well, both professionally as well as on ladder, is also starting to really become more and more of a problem, in my opinion, even though, yes, Zerg still wins stuff, obviously, and all that discussion about, top tier players, lower tier players. Anyway, this is definitely becoming in not really being a fan of the current meta, which I think a lot of people would agree would be in the same boat, but just getting that out there. And that, yeah, I do think that Protoss is way too powerful versus Terran. So with that out of the way, now let's get into the patch notes. We got ourselves some Zerg changes. So first of all, the Spire cost is reduced from 200 to 150. I think most people, if you ask them if they loved Zerg Mutalisk usage, especially versus Terran, they would say, yes, I absolutely love that. That was fun stuff. Remember the good old days of Wings of Liberty, as well as the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, and not really many other times, actually. It's not like they've entirely disappeared, but 80%, I guess, again, versus Terran versus Protoss is another thing. But I think when most people think of Spire, they think of mutas, and then they think of fun games where there's a lot of mobility and there's a lot of that Zerg, the fact that there's a bunch of shit running at your base over and over and over again. And mutas are definitely a part of that. So I think that's what this is targeting. This will also have implications for how fast you can get corruptors, of course, which might be very important against like Tempest rushes or against Battlecruiser rushes. So there is that, but I'm going to guess this is to try and make mutas a little more appealing. And if that is the case, then all for it. Go ahead and try. Centrifugal Hooks gives 5 HP bonus to Banelings again. Yeah, this was something that happened before. And I'm not even going to try to remember the timeline of patches and what they were reacting to at that time either. That would just, nope, not going to do it. But the point is, I think that's okay. I think Banelings actually started to be severely underused versus Protoss, for instance, after being used a lot. And then I also think that there probably is something to helping them a little bit more against Terran as well. And so that's fine. Microbial Shroud reduces range attacks by 50% damage. So initially, I was kind of confused because I confused this with Blinding Cloud, but Microbial Shroud, the spell that everyone kind of makes fun of, like no one ever uses it, right? The spell that initially was supposed to be for mostly, I would say, Hydras versus Carriers. This is now going to act like Dark Swarm. So you put it on your units, and then all the range attacks that are hitting your units are now reduced by 50% damage. That's big. That is huge. That is also just game changing big, This I think is going to be one of those things that you really are going to have to test in a variety of scenarios before you really say, okay, we like it or we don't like it. A lot of people are already making fun of them, reverting back to Brood War, which apparently is the holy grail of video games. But aside from that, go ahead, try it. Try and make Microbial Shroud more useful. Try and do something to give Zerg more fun tools to play with as well, I would say, because Zerg really does seem to get the short end of the stick there. And so play with it, absolutely. But it is going to be a big difference. Imagine most scenarios when you can get to infestors. Imagine any scenario you're up against, emergency infestors when you're a little behind, against a big bio ball, against tanks, which we'll come into in a second, against Protoss armies, obviously, not against the Zealots, but against the Stalkers. I mean, this is going to be huge changes in the dynamics of mid-game and late-game Zerg versus anything, because I guess it also would impact ZVZ, wouldn't it? Mass Roach versus Mass Roach, throw a couple infestors in there, suddenly they last even longer, and that's what we need, more Roach versus Roach battles. I'm kidding, there's not even that many ZVZ. And it also effect no longer persists for a few seconds, so this is just kind of like a bug fix, I would say. I imagine that was a bug. So great, they fixed that. On Protoss's side, this is also where it's really, I mean, every race got something really interesting, like one or two things that people are just, yeah. Anyway, Protoss energy overcharge grant has been reduced from 100 to 50 energy. Everyone agrees that the overcharge ended up having more implications to the StarCraft game than desired. Mostly that Protoss seems pretty good, even though they still didn't win a championship. So, okay, that's fair enough. Make it so that you don't, get a lot of High Templars with a lot of Storm, I guess. But then it also did get it got a buff and then, or a nerf and then a buff rather. So the cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. So you can do it more often, but it is only 50 energy. And okay, fine, play with that. Mothership HP reduced. I don't know exactly why, but okay. I don't think it was an issue, but whatever. Moving on. Psionic Storm. This is the big one. Duration increased from about 3 seconds to about 8.5 seconds, but its damage is reduced from 10 to 5 damage per tick. Now, I did already look at people responding to this, and some people have already played on the PTR and whatnot. Uppertree has already posted a video showcasing what this looks like if you have a Bio Ball and Medivacs underneath Storm. And what it looks like is that the Medivac will actually out-heal Storm. So that's probably not great. I don't think anyone has shown roaches going through storms yet, but basically, if you can imagine that a Marine is not going to heal through Storm with a Medivac, I mean, you can kind of get how halving the damage per tick, even though it's over a much longer period of time, would really impact the game. Psionic Storm goes from a burst spell from, definitely bursty, not disruptor bursty, but definitely bursty, to now being more of a zoning spell, which it kind of already was anyway, just because you had to play around it so carefully not to be stormed. And now it is literally just something to try and zone people out. But what is it even zoning out? If Marines and Marauders can run through it with Medivacs healing them, and Roaches presumably also will just laugh at them being stormed, what is it zoning out? Zerglings? Okay, I suppose. Sure. Banelings? Maybe not even them that much, actually. But then they get a little bit more health, I suppose. They can roll through it. I don't know how that works. But this does seem like way too much. I don't mind the idea of having its duration increased and its damage reduced, but I would definitely not do half the damage and over twice as long. These are the extremes of the parameters they could have chosen. So I think that will be changed. I think this will be too much. Okay, Protoss might be in a good state right now, but we don't need to slap them silly. All right, and I actually think that Storm, historically has been a fun spell. That is, to me, I remember Wings of Liberty, same deal with just being able to position them correctly and to be able to micro them correctly and split away from the the EMPs, and then using the Warp Prisms micro them alongside good army positioning so the Zealots can really get involved. I actually think it's a very fun style of play, but in the recent months, it's been one of the most obnoxious styles of play, right? People are talking about how much the energy overcharge has affected that Storm composition and how good it feels now. And it's just going to get better and better as people continue to utilize Storms more. So it was great that we got Storms back into the meta, but it wasn't great that it felt so oppressive alongside some other things that Protoss ended up getting or figuring out just as the meta develops, right? So yeah, this feels like too strong of a reaction to Protoss being a little good. And I definitely think we need to tone it down, or maybe even not do it entirely. That I also wouldn't mind, because I really don't think the Storm High Templar is necessarily the problem. The problem is Kydarian Amulet or Energy Overcharge as it is now, right? So yeah, I don't know about this one. The Dark Templar blink attack delay reduced. So this, I think, is basically, I don't know the numbers, so I don't know if it's just reverting, but there was a patch that changed this, and it was mostly not a concern. Some people who use Dark Templars a lot were like, wait a minute, why are we making this worse? They're pretty fun units. They're not overpowered or anything. But yeah, I think this might just be reverting something, which is fine. Surveillance mode now reveals observers. This is the other big one that people are really crying about. And surveillance mode increases vision to 15, so a decent bit larger is the radius. I actually like this. Okay, this is apparently going to be a hot take, but one of the things I saw was like, observers haven't been changed in 15 years. They have. They got surveillance mode. Surveillance mode, I think, was originally introduced as kind of this idea of lowering the skill floor. Basically, if you put them in surveillance mode, F2 doesn't take them away anymore. So the not as great Protoss players don't have to worry about that. But I do think it's pretty powerful. All right. Like I do not see observers as some like holy grail of, perfect game design that we can't touch. I really don't. Some people are kind of relating this to when observers got like a speed reduction, and the excuse given on the patch was, we think Terrans don't like it when they can barely not catch the observers, which was a really dumb reason, to be fair. But to me, this actually makes a lot of sense. You should have something taken away when you are put in surveillance mode, which sees a fuck ton, and as such can be placed in places that are hard to reach. I don't think this is actually that crazy. People seem to think that this is crazy. I do not think it's crazy. All right, you can scan. You see the entire map. Can you though, or can you maybe scan in an approximate location of where something would likely to be, compared to an observer that would be placed around your base, and then see like a bunch of drops coming in. Yeah, okay, relate a scan to that. Fuck off. Now, this actually I think is okay. I'm not saying that I think it's necessary, and that of course they should do this, and this is a long time coming, but I actually think that it's totally fine. I do think observers are rather strong. I think that sometimes when we talk about whether or not we think Protoss is too good or why they're too good, a lot of times it's talked about Storm, it's talked about Overcharge. I definitely have talked a lot more about medevac energy, and how before even all these patches, MaxPax is doing a fantastic job of showing how impactful that is by zoning as long as he can. And then once he realizes medevacs are almost out of juice, then pouncing. Like, I already thought that was a development of Protoss before they had the Overcharge shield battery change. Anyway, we talk a lot about that, but maybe on the backside, we don't really talk about the fact that there are a lot of ways that Protoss can get a lot of really good information, and observers are the easiest in surveillance mode, and they can see a lot, they can hide really well, and they are not you don't have to micro them, excuse me. You don't have to micro them. You don't have to worry about them. Which, I like the idea of not having every, Silver League Protoss have to super try hard and be as, perfect as possible. But I don't know, that did feel like it was a little bit too much, especially because, I don't know. I guess Overseer did get surveillance mode as well, to be fair, but they're also not invisible. All I can think of is just all the games that I've watched where Beyond, for instance, has to scan like 6 times to kill the observers, because sometimes the counter argument to observers and whether or not you can get a decent amount of them is, oh, well, you need the robo time. You need the robo time to build Colossus and then Disruptors and some Immortals as well, and you don't get 2 until much later on in the game. And yeah, that has always been something worth considering, the kind of the cost, the additional cost of getting an observer. But I don't know, man. There's been too many games where it seems like they have a perfectly acceptable number of Colossus, sometimes only 2, and then a lot of the Storms coming in because of the meta, right? And then oftentimes 3 Colossus. And then, they have 3 observers, all perfectly placed. And if they lose one, they say, oh, drat. And they build another one lickety-split with Chrono Boost. Seriously, there's games where Beyond just scans nonstop, and he's really good. He's getting every single time. But it's also a bit absurd that that has to be done, because great, he scans. I'm not even going to talk about mules not being used at that point, because let's say it is 3cc, you're perfectly saturated, whatever. I just think that it's kind of insane that if you're not that great at seeing the observer, that you could theoretically be, watched at all times. This has been such a strong thing for Protoss across all leagues that is underutilized in lower leagues, of course, and utilized as much as they can, I suppose, in higher leagues, because yes, it is a cost on the robo, but it does feel very strong. I feel like you should actually at least have to micro your observers or have their reduced vision to have them invisible. But I feel like with reading all these comments that we're going to be reading later on, I feel like I'm apparently crazy for thinking that. Anyway, Moving on, because there's at least one more thing that I'm probably going to have a rant about. Terran, siege tank can no longer be abducted when in siege mode. This is huge. That's such a big difference. Apparently, it also makes siege tank heroic, which means they can't be knurled, which is probably not what they wanted. But aside from that, just the focusing on the abduct thing, I don't think this is necessary. I think what they're going to do is say, well, we gave you Dark Swarm, so tanks are really not going to feel that great. And that I can kind of agree with. Initially, when you've barely gotten a couple of Vipers out in time for their push, you're not really going to have a lot to choose. Like, you can't choose both Microbial Shroud and Blinding Cloud at the same time. But honestly, I like that there's a bit of a decision there in how you're going to approach the engagement. Are you going to take out tanks, or are you going to reduce the damage to your Hydras and Roaches and whatever it is? So I think that kind of makes sense in a way, because they are considering their other patch notes, right? But I get why people are immediately gobsmacked by this, because, in a vacuum, as we think of dealing with siege tanks like a mech push right now, not being able to abduct sounds freaking crazy. Not even a mech push, just like an 8-Rax maybe too. A siege tank abducted could be huge. But anyway, I think it's because they gave this. And as you are able to afford more Vipers, and it's really not that uncommon to see 6 Vipers, right? You'll be able to do both. And then you can't abduct a siege tank, but you can still abduct, the tanks, or the Thors, or the Vikings, or what have you. So I don't mind them playing with it, basically. I don't know if it's going to stay, but I don't mind it. I do think, as far as some of the out of professional balance, or even, ladder games kind of way of looking at the game, it is going to be weird. So one thing that Blizzard typically did, I guess, is that they not only made balance changes for the balance of 1v1, but they also made sure to always have some type of soft rules about stuff, so that it makes sense. When you jump into a game and you don't really know StarCraft, but you know RTS, some of the things you look at, they make sense. The sound effects they make, the visuals that they have, as well as the continuity of the spell, whatever, right? So, for instance, Storm works on everything, but not structures. Okay, suddenly you make Storm not work on Roaches. Who's ever going to put that together naturally, right? But anyway, so I feel like this is kind of a concern for that, the more overarching design of the game, which is that if you learn what Abduct is, and you learn what a Siege Tank is, you will most likely try to abduct a Siege Tank. So that's a bit problematic, but I don't know. I don't know if they're really going to keep this anyway. I'm not a big believer in them keeping it. Viking cost has been reduced. I'm not really sure about this, but I think it might be, again, a reaction to the Spire cost being reduced. Not that you deal with mutas with Vikings, but perhaps Corruptors. This also might be a response to the Protoss versus Terran meta, where, the cost of getting enough Vikings fast enough, as well as being able to swap back into Vikings once they start remaking Colossus, is difficult. I'm not sure, but they are cheaper, 25 cheaper. Drilling claws effectiveness increased, which is weirdly worded, but I guess that just means that they burrow 0.3 seconds faster, right? Do I understand that right? Which, I don't know. I feel like if the other patch notes weren't kind of crazy, this would also be something people were really talking about, but I guess the idea is that people really complain about Widow Mines. They complain about them without drilling claws. They complain about Widow Mine drops in your probe line, not the microing of them on the front line. Okay. And then hyperspeed rotors research time decreased 79 seconds. I don't know what it was. 109? I have no idea. That's a weird thing not to include. But I don't know why they would buff hyperspeed rotors, aside from the fact that they think it's kind of fun, I guess. I don't know. I actually really don't know. They're hoping they can use it versus the spy. No, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I don't know why this is in here. The one thing I don't think of when I think of games, either mine or professional games, are Speedy Banshees. Although there were a couple of really cool Speedy Banshee games at EWC. I'm not sure. I will be honest with you. I know some of the inner workings of the Balance Council, or at least I did. I have no idea what's happened in the last 6 months. And from my understanding, basically, Terran players are the loudest. Is this going to get me canceled? Am I not going to be hired for something ever again? I don't know. But yeah, Terran, you know, imagine a group project and you have 3 people who are talking and one person is really energetic and really excited and also unintentionally ends up hogging all the limelight. And the Protoss player is like, hey, but I have an idea. And one of the other guys is like, okay, no, but like, listen to this first of all. Hold on, what about cyclones? What about cyclones, right? And the Protoss player gets really tired of not being heard and goes, I guess I won't talk anymore. And I don't know what Zerg players are doing. But yeah, any group project will look like that, won't it? So I don't want to blame that as the reason for this, but sometimes I do see some of these patch notes and I'm like, I guess someone liked Banshees. Someone wants to use Banshees more. I don't know who, but someone. I don't know. There might be a better reason, right? But this is one of those patch notes that is so out of nowhere. It also is so bare bones. They have completely given up trying to explain their reasoning behind these things, which I can kind of understand. But I did like when they gave the reasoning, because then I wouldn't just be confused. We can only ask for so much, I suppose. And then also the Cyclone attack got fixed. Mothership attack, fix. Cyclone lock-on, fix. Oh, that was mostly what people complaining about. That's right. The Cyclone attack upgrade even +1 instead of +2. Oh, so that was actually like Cyclones had a nerf on them. But anyways, most people were complaining about the lock-on cooldown, so they fixed that. And then orbital command is not rallying. Don't even know what that is, but good thing they fixed it. And that is it, guys. That is all the patch notes. Already 21 minutes into this, so sorry about that. Most of the time was probably on the surveillance mode observers, but whatever. So now we're going to just take a quick look through the Reddit thread and see if anyone has anything particularly insightful to say. As I said, I already kind of read through it and got the gist. Yeah, I want to use more Swarm Hosts and Broodlords. Broodlords against Reduced Toss Vikings. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Yeah, and I do think someone else said that this is disappointing as a patch because it didn't address the really boring Zerg units, the ones that are, yeah, definitely drowning at the bottom of the pool like the Broodlord, and they're not fun anymore. And I agree. I actually very much sympathize with the Zerg players out there. So that does suck, but then it's not really all that surprising, is it, that in the last 6 months we've had the situation we've had, and most of the patch seems directed towards the PvT thing? That doesn't surprise me, but it does suck that Zerg kind of gets, you know, again, the short end of the stick, I suppose, but microbial shroud change, I think, will be fun. I think it will make some difference in how fun Zerg is, but we'll see. And then, yeah, a lot of talk about the Protoss Storm, which I agree is just too much. It's not going to be impactful enough when you need it. The Spire there was a typo. Gemini didn't like the Observer nerf, but I really don't think it's that random, actually. I mean, that's the thing, though, is that I don't think it's random. As I said, like, there's all these things we talk about when it comes to Protoss that we discuss more, but underlying a lot of that, I would say, is the ability for Protoss to generally have vision on the Terran army almost at all times. I say almost because it is generally, you know, close to your base and on their base, but that is already a fuck ton of information. So anyway, I don't think it's that random. I think it actually is probably another reason Protoss is doing fairly well. I just don't know if we need to have the Observer and the Storm and the Overcharge, right? Like, a lot of things have been changed for Protoss, and maybe just pick 1 or 2 and then also reduce, I don't know. And certainly the Storm, you know, don't make it as drastic of a change. I don't know how you would change observers outside of getting rid of the detection, but certainly just limiting their vision could also be a way of going for it. So that surveillance mode isn't going to give you more. It just is a thing that stops you from F2ing. That I would also be fine with. Big changes, yes, indeed. Microbial Shroud won't make it to live. I'm not really sure about that. I mean, Dark Swarm does work in Brood War, but there are also a lot of really powerful things in Brood War. I don't know. Dark Swarm's also more effective, so Thing is, I think it could just be a thing where they say it's too difficult to guess what's going to happen with it. Because again, PTR can only do so much. And so we're just not going to bother with it, which I'd also be okay with. At this point in my StarCraft career, I am totally fine with a lot of big changes. And I'm also totally of the understanding, and even was one of the people crying about it, that you can't fix it quickly. So I do want changes, and if they're big, great. But if someone were to say it's too hard to balance, it's too hard to implement, there's too many potential for bugs, I would say, okay, fair enough, moving on. So that might be why it doesn't make it out. Why do they buff the absolute shit out of Terran? It is all buffs, isn't it? And again, I think maybe they're just more fervent, is that a word? Communicators somewhere out there. Yeah. Anyway, there also might be some sympathy to the Terran race just because of, a bunch of Terrans moving to Protoss and playing PvP instead of TvP. You could say kind of overall that this patch, here's my summary, I suppose. We're not going to go through all of these. There were a lot of the same. Here's my summary of the patch. Zerg was kind of remembered. They are now the crying kid on that meme, but they're not at the bottom of the pool. And then Protoss versus Terran was the thing. They were going to fix that or die trying, because it's been so terrible in the last 6 months. It's been not fun at all to watch, because then you're like, well, at least Protoss would win, and that didn't happen either. So but yeah, this is, I think, everything here, basically everything here has some reason for being here because of the PvT meta, and exactly what has been happening in the last 6 months would be my take on it. Obviously, abducts don't impact PPT, but I don't know what exactly they were thinking when they're thinking Terran versus Zerg, other than, again, they gave such a powerful reduction spell that they figured they had to take away abduct, basically. Okay. But a lot of other things, if people are like, why would they ever do this? Think about PvT and how much attention that's getting, how bad it has gotten for Terran players to not get good, just change race. It has finally happened. If the other race is so good, why don't you just play that race? Well, it's happening. And we don't want that to happen because nonstop PvPs does in fact get boring. So, yeah, it might be too strong. I think it is too strong. But I do think in general, when we see stuff balanced in video games, like all over the place, the idea is usually to make something really strong so people use it, so people see the impact of it. It's very obvious, and then they scale it back. Hopefully they will scale it back. I'm always concerned, though, because we don't know how reliable this is, Blizzard. We don't know if they're 100% intending to change stuff. They also think, okay, we'll push it really hard and then we'll pull it back. Or they're thinking, we're just going to push this out because whatever, man. Okay, bye. See you in 6 months. We have no idea. So hopefully it does change. But as I said, I'm actually okay with a lot of the experimenting going on here. So yeah, that'll be the end of the video. Thanks for watching. What are your thoughts? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think observers should never be touched? They have never done anything in their life, and they deserve all the monies. Do you think Zerg actually has something fun again, or is that just kind of lame? And is it a Terran cabal that is pulling the strings? Answer it down below. And thanks for watching. See you soon for more StarCraft stuff. Bye-bye.